Hello everyone, this is the Prussian Prince with a bit of a special EU4 guide video. Yes, that's right, I'm making an EU4 guide, sort of. Now, let's get into it. So, what is this about? Well, it's about idea groups in EU4. And no, first disclaimer here, and maybe only disclaimer, probably, is that this is for multiplayer. We're not talking about idea groups for single player, because yes, in single player, an idea group like, say, diplomatic or influence or, say, humanist, those would be amazing in single player, right? So one would think, okay, then maybe they're really good in multiplayer too. No. There's maybe 0.1% situations in which you would take any of those in multiplayer because they're simply trash. Just not really worth it in multiplayer, because in multiplayer the real stopping like, how should I put it, the real issue that you have to deal with is mainly the armies of other players. So what do you do to overcome that hurdle? Well, you get more military ideas yourself. Now, which are exactly the top 10 ideas? Well, in no particular order, because really, ranking them in an order is going to be very, very difficult. So I cannot rank them in an order. It obviously also depends on the nation you're playing, so making a general order is not really worth it, but I can say which are the top 10. So basically, I'm gonna start with the easy idea groups. So you have here the military ideas. Now, let's start with offensive. So see here, offensive. You have land leader shock, which is real nice. Recruitment time, not really. It's not really that great, to be honest. Land leader fire, so 2 leader pips already, which is quite nice. 2 guaranteed leader pips, that is. Prestige from land battles, not a big deal. Siege ability plus 20%, pretty decent actually. Land force limit modifier plus 20%, also pretty decent. Discipline plus 5%, pretty damn good as well. And the final ambition, I guess it's called, I think, is the recover army morale speed plus 5%, which is alright. So when would you take this? Well, personally, I would take this if I'm playing something like Brandenburg, okay? So let's stack switch to Brandenburg. So if we go to Brandenburg, let's look at them. Well, first of all, we have nice discipline already, so you want to keep stacking discipline. You get morale of armies already anyway because of army professionalism, which is why you shouldn't take defensive. And you have the infantry combat ability, you have, again, the nice discipline here. So stacking discipline, making Prussia really, really strong is like, have really efficient armies is basically what you should do, and taking offensive guarantees that. So offensive for Brandenburg is a solid first pick for an idea group. It's also good for other nations, but for Brandenburg in particular, and I would say Sweden as well, and it's, again, mainly because Sweden gets, again, extra infantry combat ability, more discipline, and generally that's really, really good. Sweden is really, really good militarily wise, so they need to, like, you should have a really, really strong and elite army as Sweden. Almost as good as Brandenburg, basically, but not quite there, but quite close indeed. So Sweden is really strong as well with offensive. But now let's take a look at the other idea groups. So we've already gone over offensive. As first choice for someone like Sweden or Brandenburg for military idea, really, really good. Now let's look at defensive. And this used to be one of the best idea groups in the game in terms of military, and it still is really, really good. Like, it's never wrong to take it, but there could be more optimal choices. But the first issue with defensive, though, is that it just doesn't have really good policies. You're not getting extra discipline, you're not getting extra combat ability for infantry or artillery or cavalry. So there isn't really anything in particular, while let's say with defensive ideas, offensive, which is what we looked at earlier, you have, well, let's look at offensive plus economic ideas, for instance. Plus 10% artillery combat ability, which is pretty damn massive, actually. And with innovative, plus 1 leader siege, plus 10% siege ability. So that is quite decent stuff. But really, the most important one is the economic plus offensive that gives like a really, really nice bonus. So again, offensive, better policies than something like defensive. So again, weakness of defensive is the policies, and that it's really good in the early game and then starts to fall off in the late game, so to speak. But yeah, you get extra yearly army tradition, which is really quite nice. You get morale of armies, which is really, really good. This is like the main bonus of defensive. Extra land leader maneuver, which is decent. Lower land maintenance modifier is good. This fort stuff is great. Helps Russia a lot. Then supply trains, that's alright. Lower land attrition and attrition for enemies, which is really quite good, actually. But again, defensive, really, really good in the early games, so don't take this later on into the game. Like, normally you take this as first idea group, if anything. And yeah, this is really, really good for someone like Muscovy, because they've got a lot of land to work with, and they need morale. So, defensive is first choice for Muscovy, something that you could take. Now, how would defensive be useful for other nations? Let's think about it this way. If you are France, alright, let's imagine, okay, so let's stack switch to France. As part of your ideas, you do indeed have extra morale of armies, so the Elan, which is really, really good. So, if you take defensive ideas, and then pair it up with economic, and you just rush as soon as possible to get both Elan and morale of armies from defensive ideas in the early game, you will be a monster. You will be unstoppable. So keep that in mind. Like, it is something that you could really do and just dominate the game early on, because you're gonna have a total of, let's see, 20% plus, I believe, 15%. Yeah, that's 35% extra morale of armies. You will just dominate land battles early on, because again, morale is the most important factor in the early game, because of combat width, because of the amount of unit pips in the beginning. So like, there's generally very little damage done in the early game compared to later on, especially once cannons come into play. So keep that in mind, basically. What you do with defensive is, if you're not Muscovy, you generally go for a timing attack. And if you don't know what a timing attack is, well, I'm basically stealing this terminology from something like StarCraft 2. StarCraft 2, well, I'm really steering off of the situation at hand, but in StarCraft 2, you simply go for units, like you build a lot of units, and get, say, a nice upgrade, plus 1 infantry weapons, or plus 1 ranged for, I don't know, for air units or whatever, just like an example. And once that finishes, immediately you attack the enemy. That's what I mean with the timing. You surprise the enemy with overwhelming morale, in this case with defensive, also with the LAN, which is something that they're not going to be able to deal with really well at all. So keep that in mind. But again, if you do decide to go this route, do remember that it's going to make you weaker in the late game, because defensive doesn't scale very well into the late game, so to speak. So it's not that important later on. So keep that in mind. Use it to secure yourself an early lead in the game if you want to take defensive. You could also just take only up until the second idea and then just completely take it out once you have used it for whatever you wanted to early on, and then just focus on getting replace it with a different military idea group. You can do that as well. But yeah, this video is already becoming quite in-depth, so to say. So yeah, that's defensive and defensive, two of the most popular idea groups. But then you have quality. Now, if we look at quality, let's just look at it. 10% infantry combat ability, really good stuff. Plus 1 yearly army tradition, pretty decent. Plus 10% cavalry combat ability, it's alright. But then you have plus 5% ship durability, plus 10% morale of navies, not great. Minus 25% naval attrition, not too important. But then you have plus 10% artillery combat ability, which is really, really good. And plus 5% discipline, again, really, really, really good. So as you can see here already, there are 3 ideas that don't really help too much when you're land power. Whereas say offensive ideas give you so many boosts for land, so overall they're better than quality ideas. But when are quality ideas useful? Well, they're very useful when, say, you're Britain, because your ships also gain a boost. Or, additionally, when you can pair that up with, again, get some policies with economic ideas, because that's plus 5% discipline, which is massive, or with innovative, plus 20% infantry combat ability, or even with religious, plus 5% morale of armies, and plus 10% siege ability. It's like so many different things that quality pairs up well with. It's just really, really good if you've got other idea groups to build up on. So like, I would not take this if you don't have economic or if you don't have innovative or religious, for instance, because on its own it's never a bad choice, of course, but I just wouldn't take it over the other idea groups mentioned so far. So yeah, I would take this as basically any nation at some point for sure, just like I would with innovative or with offensive. But yeah, mostly Brandenburg and Sweden should focus on that as soon as possible, after they get offensive potentially and economic or innovative or something like that, a mix of those. Now with not with France, but with quantity ideas. This is undervalued by some in the multiplayer scene, but let me tell you exactly how good this idea group is and for whom it's good. There is this misconception about quantity ideas that it's good for nations that have a small manpower pool, when it's actually the exact opposite. It's bad for nations that have a low manpower pool, and it's really good for nations with a big manpower pool. And let me tell you why. It's because the effects like give you so much more when you're big, whereas if you're small, it's really not that big of a deal. So think about it this way: 50% national manpower modifier, massive boosts. 20% manpower recovery speed, pretty damn good. Regiment costs minus 10%, it is good. Land maintenance modifier, minus 10%, good. 25% available mercenaries. Not bad at all actually, because mercenaries, you might actually end up running out of mercenaries at some point, so it's quite decent. Garrison size plus 25%, line attrition minus 10%, again, not really that great, but here, this is an amazing one. So land force limit modifier plus 50%. So you can field such a massive army with quantity, and for this alone, the quantity idea group is just worth it. Now, who should take this idea group? Now, someone like Muscovy, well, you would say, yeah, Muscovy would benefit a lot from this, but you don't just need a big manpower pool to draw from to gain maximum efficiency from quantity ideas, but you also need a good economy. And now Muscovy is not somebody who has a good economy, so really, this fits more someone like France, or Castile, or Ottomans, for instance. These three are prime examples of where quantity ideas are very, very useful because they are generally going to have piles of cash sitting around and their economy is going to be amazing. So going quantity with these nations is going to be super important. For instance, with Ottomans, you can easily have 100k troops in multiplayer by the 1500s. Easily. So that is going to be really, really scary for Europe. So they are really going to have to band together to deal with you. So just keep that in mind, especially if the Janissaries have spawned for Ottomans. And actually, let's look at the Ottomans for a little bit. So you have the idea groups here of Ottomans. So you also have some nice stacking here for the Ottomans, like quantity stacks with the ambitions of the Ottoman ideas, plus 33% land force limit modifier, which is going to be massive. Extra manpower recovery speed, which actually got fixed quite a while back, I think, because it used to be plus 200% if I remember correctly. Ghazi was like amazingly overpowered. But yeah, you get even quicker manpower recovery speed. So basically, you can field such a large army as the Ottomans. It's not even funny. Really early on, which is really gonna be able to allow you to overpower your enemies. And you're even gonna have a quality advantage on top of quantity because you're gonna have the Janissaries. So that is something to think about. Quantity really good, and scales fine into the late game as well. So keep that in mind. And again, you need a really strong economy for it, so just don't pick at this anyone. Because it's not gonna work out that well. Now let's look at other idea groups I deem very good in multiplayer. But it's not just me, because I've watched the other people play and I've asked others for advice, and generally there is a consensus. So there you go. Now, what else is there that's good? Well, let's switch over to diplomatic ideas. Now, out of diplomatic ideas, what is good in multiplayer? Well, the only ones that you should really consider in multiplayer are these three right here. But really, out of those three, generally it's going to be exploration, for sure. This is the best diplomatic idea group that you could ever get. And it's something that you should take as Castile, England, or Portugal as first idea group most of the time, because you want to get to the Americas very fast and build up colonies there so you can ferry in so much money. So that's going to make you an insane amount of money in so that's why you want exploration, to get there first, because you have bases around. But if you're somebody like, say, Netherlands, or somebody else who's trying to colonize somewhere like in Italy or whatever, you might be worth waiting until second idea group, if you even take it at all. That's we said. But basically, England, Castile, Portugal, they kind of have to go for exploration, because otherwise they can't really expand. I mean, you could go super Europe focused, Britain or Castile, but generally that's not really worth it, and people will see you in a bad light, so to speak. So generally try to avoid that and go for exploration, because that's not really considered to be an aggressive move. Whereas say if you start eating up France as Castile or as England, people will see you as a real threat and will try and coalition you. So PvEing your way to victory is generally more efficient than PvPing, because PvPing is bloody. You have to take loans, you have to really kill your economy most of the time if you wanna. Well, not most of the time necessarily, but you're gonna have to really work hard to win wars if it's PvP. Whereas if you PvE, then it's generally much less draining on your economy. So keep that in mind. That is why PvEing is so good in multiplayer, as long as you can do it. Now, what are idea groups should you keep in mind? Well, again, from diplomatic after exploration, you have maritime and trade. What can I say about those? Well, I would go for trade. Because trade is going to help quite a bit if you have the opportunity to take it. Extra trade power, more merchants, really good. Extra trade range, trade efficiency, merchants, again. Trade steering, important. Caravan power, really, really good. And again, an extra merchant. So 3 extra merchants. Pretty damn good. And of course, all the other bonuses. Now for maritime, it's not bad per se either. Yearly naval tradition, national sailors modifier, global ship repair, naval force limit modifier. This one in particular is really, really good. Extra naval force limit modifier. Ship cost, naval land lead maneuver. Blockade efficiency is quite decent too, as is the ships can repair when coastal sea zones. But trade is quite nice as well. So between these two, I would... It is difficult to say, but maritime could be better than trade depending on the situation. But now it's with these two here, it's gonna become more like top 11 instead of top 10 idea groups. But there you go. Difficult to choose between these two, and it is situational, to be honest. But yeah, again, only somebody like, say, Castile, England, Portugal might be able to use those two idea groups efficiently, but it is a bit risky for Castile and Portugal, honestly. Well, mostly Castile, because if you take something like trade or maritime, then the French player is gonna look at it and be like, you have exploration, really? And you have maritime or trade? And why shouldn't I attack you? Because your troops are garbage. So taking exploration, taking trade or maritime might leave you weak against others. So keep that in mind when you pick it. Only pick it when you know you're safe to do it, which is gonna be in very few cases, but mostly a British player can do something like that and not really have to worry about it, because again, he can use the ships to make sure that people cannot land on his isles, because once you get like 100k on the British Isles or something like that, Britain's not going to be able to do anything because they have really terrible troops, generally, unless they go for mill ideas. But now that we have the diplomatic and military ideas off the table, let's look at administrative ideas. And out of administrative ideas, there are actually 4 good ones here. Believe it or not. And it's difficult to choose between them, but there is a clear winner here. I would go and say that economic is the best idea group overall. Because you get the extra tax modifier, which is decent. Construction cost is really, really good, because you're going to be able to make manufactories at such a cheaper cost as well. It's really important. And of course, the cheaper temples and whatnot, cheaper, what are these buildings called? Marketplaces. So it's gonna stack up really, really nicely. And again, yearly inflation reduction plus 0.10. Very important if you got like lots of gold going around, gold income, so you don't take as much inflation. Interest per annum, it's like, not really great, but centralization is alright. Land maintenance modifier is pretty good. Production efficiency is decent. And here, the last one, the so-called ambition of economic ideas. Development cost minus 20%. This is a huge boost because it makes developing so much more monarch point efficient. So that makes economic really, really strong. Well, just basically really good boosts all around and a great ambition. Who would take an economic? Well, again, overall, it's really not a bad choice for anyone, really. England can take it, France can take it, Castile can take it, for instance. Somebody in Italy could take it, for instance. Austria, Brandenburg, Sweden, Ottomans could take it even. I think everyone can benefit from this choice. So economic, really, really, really good overall. And it's not a bad idea to pick it in multiplayer. I would say basically any nation. Now what about the other three that I wanted to talk about? So you have innovative, religious, and administrative. When are these good to take? Well, let's go over administrative. I wouldn't rank it as highly as, say, religious or innovative. But administrative can be useful in its own way. That if I were to take administrative, I would only, and I repeat, only take the first two ideas from this idea group. Organized mercenary payments, which is alright, and then the most important one, adaptability. Core creation cost minus 25%. Who is this useful for? Honestly, I would say the person who benefits mostly from this idea group is Muscovy, because they'll be expanding a hell of a lot, potentially, so taking administrative could be worth it, but again, only up until the second idea, and that is about it. So keep that in mind. But you can do without it as well, it's no big deal. But yeah, only take up to the second idea if you do take administrative, because it's not that great of an idea group to keep around. But definitely will help with mass expanding as, say, Muscovy, so you can do that. Or it would work if you're a player in, like, you could say, Asia or India or something, and you're alone, you're PvEing your way to victory. It could definitely work, because it would allow you to core provinces very, very quickly. So that is something that you might be able to do. Would be nice. Now though, the other two idea groups in the administrative tab that I'd like. Religious and innovative. What do I like so much about them? Well, let's look at, for instance, innovative. I would not pick this as a first idea group for sure. That's what I'm gonna flat out say. But let's see what it gives. Prestige decay minus 1%, it's alright. Lower mercenary maintenance, pretty decent. Lower tech cost and lower institution embracement cost, pretty decent stuff. Possible advisors plus 1, decent stuff. Reduced inflation cost minus 10%, not really that big of a deal. Monthly war exhaustion minus 0.05, not bad. Leaders without upkeep plus 1, not bad. And advisor costs minus 25%, which is a quite good ambition, which means that you can take, say, 333 advisors much more easily because they will be cheaper. So you could essentially stack up, say, a rank 3 Master of Mint that is cheaper for your country to employ because it's a state advisor. And it's not the state advisor, correct myself, an estate or advisor. And then stack that up with the innovative idea group, which would make him really, really cheap to employ. So keep that in mind. That's when innovative is useful. But the big thing about innovative, which is even better than that, is, say, if you look at the policies. Now, take a look at, say, innovative plus quality. That's 20% extra infantry combat ability, which is huge. Huge. And again, innovative plus offensive, plus 1 leader siege, and plus 10% siege ability. That is really decent stuff. So, really now, innovative has good policies that you can use all around, so it is a pretty good idea group. Now, religious. I would rank religious over innovative, generally. I think religious is usually the second best idea group in admin tab. Over, I mean, after economic, of course. Now, why is religious so good? Well, you have Deus Vult, permanent CB against neighboring heathens and heretics, which is quite a good CB. Because of, really, it makes everything cost less, lower E and stuff, so that's really quite good. Missionary schools, +1 missionary, which is quite good if you're trying to expand massively into, say, Sunni land as Muscovy. So that really helps out Muscovy. It's a good idea group for Muscovy to take. Minus 25% stability cost modifier. It's meh. Plus 3% missionary strength. Quite good boost, actually. +1 tolerance of true faith. Not really a big deal. Then +1 yearly prestige. That's alright. +2% missionary strength versus heretics. Not the biggest of deal. And then culture conversion cost -25% and ulema loyalty +10%. That's because we're the Ottomans. But otherwise it would be something like, say, clergy royalty. Royalty, I mean loyalty, of course. So let's look at the, where's the religious? There you go. Clergy loyalty +10%. Now let's look at religious policies. Or did we already look at them? No, we didn't. So religious. With quality, you get +5% extra morale. And +10% siege ability. Very good bonus. Now with quantity, you get +10% morale and +5% recover army morale speed. Pretty good bonus again. So you can see that religious also has some pretty good policies that you could use. That's really quite the morale. And if you stack both quality and quantity policies, you basically have +15% morale, which is essentially what you get from defensive ideas. So there you go. If you have religious, you can kind of get the big bonus from defensive eventually once you get 2 other idea groups. So religious, really quite a strong administrative idea group, which you should take. But again, all this stuff is in multiplayer. So in single player, this could be entirely different because you would take influence, you would take something like diplomatic, you would take humanist, you would take administrative a lot more. So yeah, because in single player, what do you focus on is getting idea groups that let you expand as fast as possible. But in multiplayer, the focus is on having an army that's as strong as you can get it to be most of the time. But if you can take calculated risks and be greedy, if you by taking something like economic or exploration, if you know you can counteract it by doing Diplo with other players and having them help you in wars or something. So that's why I really like multiplayer in EU4 and I prefer it over single player, because players are a lot more competent, of course, though it does take a lot of time. But anyway, that's it for me. So hope you all found this useful. Don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe. Follow me on social media. I'll see you all next time.